of Mice and Men. Section 1, Extract Revision. So, first thing, description, first page, because Steinbeck is using cinematic techniques to set the scene. He talks about the mountains, he talks about the water, he talks about the valley side, lined with trees. It creates a calm atmosphere. As mentioned in my last of Mice and Men video, wow, I have a really fun life making these videos. Lizard makes a great skittering writing technique, hence the WT, standing for writing technique. Onomatopoeia creates a sense of tension as Steinbeck begins to focus in on the action. Anything else written on this page? Ooh, yes. The limb is worn smooth by the men who have sat on it. He's obviously talking about the limbs of trees, not just like someone's limb. It's like an arm or anything. That shows the 1930s America, where men had passed through this area many times, remembering that it was a time of men moving from job to job, and that's where you can get your 1930s America reference in. Okay. About halfway down page 2, we have the introduction of George and Lenny. One stayed behind the other. Of course, this is a great way of describing George and Lenny, how George is the more dominant. You might want to remember this particular quotation when you are doing essays and you want to use quotations from other sections, or you're doing a whole text essay, because it is a good one to show that parental side of George and the more dominant side of George. Again, 1930s America, it is unique because friendship at this time would have been unique in terms of the men travelled together. They're not related, they're not in any kind of relationship. It is simply the fact that George cares for Lenny because Lenny struggles in an adult world. Bless his little heart. You have a description of George and also the opposite, with Lenny behind him walked his opposite, a huge man, shapeless of face, with large pale eyes. Immediately, through the use of huge man, shapeless, and sharp, strong features, describing George, there is a contrast, a juxtaposition, if you will, between the descriptions showing that George is more dominant. Sharp, strong, sibilance. I wouldn't say it's unpleasant, but I would imagine what they've come from, as referred into the rest of the section, has been fairly unpleasant with what has happened in Weed. So you might want to mention that. It might not be worth it if it isn't relevant to the question. Another description of Lenny, the way a bear, the way a bear drags his paws. And I have written animalistic instinct. Lenny struggles in the adult world, and much like an animal, he works on instinct, and Steinbeck makes that comparison through his writing, usually either through metaphor or simile, and we find that in a minute. There's another simile. Here we go, on to the next page. Drank the surface of the green pool. Again, he is working on instinct. Here's a simile. With long gulps, snorting into the water like a horse. Writing technique. Simile shows animalistic qualities because Lenny works on instinct and isn't able to survey a situation like an adult would be able to. George then reprimands him. Remember, reprimands is a much better word than tells off or has a go at in an essay, and it shows that parental role that George has. Okay, this is page 6. This is all about Lenny and the mouse. Now, this is repeated twice. We have 2 mouse episodes. However, the second one has been included in an extract from an exam paper for OCR a few years ago, so I haven't gone through that in this particular video, but I can do it in class if anyone is wondering about it. So, we have a look. I found it dead. Give it here, said George. Oh, leave me. Oh, I can't read. What is the matter with me?
Your glasses.
Do I want my glasses? No, I'm just tired. Do you want your glasses? You can't read, you old woman. Brilliant. So Lenny says, I found it dead. Give it here, said George. Oh, let me have it, George. Give it here. Again, shows that parental relationship. But why does Lenny want the mouse? George questions that. What you want of a dead mouse anyways? I could pet it with my thumb while we walked along, said Lenny. That looks very childlike. It's very childlike behaviour. It is also a categoric reference because he enjoys stroking things that are soft, much like a young child is comforted by things that are soft to the touch, which is why you'll find a lot of children's books for sort of 1 to 3-year-olds, even 6 months old. They will have things that you can get the child to feel, like different materials, because it is a very childlike experience, and that establishes that with Lenny. Lenny has a problem with his memory. That is shown on the bottom of page 6. He struggles. I forgot again. And then we have a reference to weed, and that is a link to previous events, and only worth mentioning if it relates to the question, or you can put it as a reference at the bottom of your explanation section in the Peel paragraph. We move on to the next page. Again, Lenny is having to repeat George's instructions to him. I ain't going to say nothing. I ain't going to say nothing. It shows that he struggles in an adult world. Cataphoric reference, meaning it foreshadows something that might happen later on in the novel. Do no bad thing like you done in weed, neither. Obviously, those of you who have read the novel we're through, and I'm hoping that's everybody, we know that actually, of course, Lenny will do a bad thing. Bless his little heart. And it also shows at the bottom of page 7 that George is getting frustrated with Lenny, much like a parent would with a child. So on page 8, there is a reference worth mentioning if you get this as an extract. It is about the water snake slipped along the pool. The reason I have put reference to section 6 is because at the beginning of section 6, with the cinematic techniques, Steinbeck describes the water snake once again, but this time the water snake gets eaten by the heron. So it's suggesting, or Steinbeck is suggesting, Lenny being in trouble, whereas this time, when we first meet George and Lenny, it's almost very calm and the water snake is going about his business. Don't write going about his business in an essay, but you get my drift. Reference something somewhere else. What else do we need to talk about? So, page 10. Again, when George has his verbal tirade and shouts at Lenny and reprimands him, he says things like, you crazy fool. Lenny shows that he cannot manage in an adult world. Lenny's lip quivered and tears started in his eyes, which shows his childlike quality. At the bottom of the next page, page 11, we have a few things. This is after George and Lenny have had a few tense moments. The flame cracked up among the twigs. I'll move it closer so we can read it a bit better, mainly me, because I am blind without my glasses. Writing technique equaling tension. Steinbeck uses onomatopoeia, which is writing technique, hence the WT that I've got in my notes, that suggests tension. Remember, if we are looking at assonance, alliteration, sibilance, onomatopoeia, you need to be looking for the sounds that those words create. And cracked up has that slightly harsh sound, not only describing the flame of the fire that they're sitting around, but also perhaps the atmosphere after they have had their argument. Again, the verbal tirade continues and it shows George's frustration, and he also mentions what he could do without Lenny, a life without Lenny. But of course, if you get that extract, you can reference section 6, because after Lenny has been shot, George is almost in a state of disbelief, and actually Lenny gives him some security and a reason to continue with the focal dream. So as much as George is saying these things in section 1, it's not actually true. So we move to page 13. I'm not doing every page, I'm just doing the ones that I think will be most useful. This is where Lenny shows his childlike manipulation. George, very softly, no answer. George, what do you want? I was only fooling, George. I don't want no ketchup. And we've talked about this before, that he desperately tries to get into George's good books. Again, I wouldn't use that phrase in an essay. Maybe something like tries to pacify George by using childlike manipulation. He also shows that he struggles in an adult world when Steinbeck, at the bottom of page 13, says, I don't need no nice food with ketchup. I'd lay out in the sun and nobody would hurt me. This is where he's talking about going away so that George wouldn't have to look after him. And it shows that he struggles in an adult world, that he finds things difficult. He's clearly scared a lot of the time, but actually he's also using that childlike manipulation to get back into George's good books. Page 14. A few things on here. This is the first time the dream is mentioned. So Lenny spoke craftily. We've talked about younger siblings, nephews, nieces, cousins being able to manipulate a situation by being cute, cuddling up, etc. And I think Lenny might be slightly aware of what he's doing when he mentions the dream. He knows that it is something that he and George share in. So he's using that to reconnect with George. And it's the first time the focal dream is mentioned. And of course, he talks about the rabbits. Why would he not? Now, George, the description that Steinbeck uses for George here and shows that he repeated his words rhythmically. It shows that he's repeated them many, many times before. It's something that they have shared in many times before, and shows that unique friendship of 1930s America. But also that it's something that both of them have heard and said so many times they can almost repeat things, which is why on page 16, no, 15, I lie, we have Lenny repeating sections such as, and live off the fat of the land, Lenny shouted, and have rabbits. Go on, George. He's able to repeat these things because the focal dream has been mentioned many times before. Guys like us that work on ranches are the loneliest guys in the world. That does reference the era, but I also think it shows the unique friendship that George and Lenny have, which is supported by this moment that is not only mentioned here, but again mentioned in section 6. But not us. And why? Because I got you to look after me, and you got me to look after you, and that's why. It shows that unique friendship. It shows they rely on each other. It's not that George solely looks after Lenny, but Lenny provides George with some kind of stability, some kind of focus and motivation. So moving forward to the last page, page 18 of this section, just as they have made up and they're settling down for the night, Lenny just establishes that connection with George and almost suggests that he could go away. And George says, "You can just as well go to hell," said George. "Shut up now." He's making sure that George does actually want him. And what I've said here is it's not actually George being mean. It reflects the era and the status, the way he's talking to Lenny, and the normality of George's interaction with Lenny. It is no longer cross. It's no longer frustrated. He's reassuring Lenny. We also have cinematic technique to finish the section, and something like the sycamore leaves whispered in a little night breeze shows a writing technique. It's metaphorical. The breeze, perhaps gentle, which suggests the sort of calm atmosphere. And the last thing I mentioned was George and Lenny have not gone to the new ranch. They have taken the opportunity to spend the night in the brush. And this is because George is his own boss at this moment. He hasn't got anyone to answer to. It suggests a freedom that George yearns for. So he really takes that moment and is his own boss for that one night before starting the new job. And I believe that's probably it. Several things just to mention. If you have an extract and you're unsure about it, think about dialogue and description. If there's a lot of description in it and we've got cinematic techniques, try and look for writing techniques. Try and look for things that will help you analyze language, such as connotations of words, writing techniques, and what they might show. If you have a lot of dialogue, you're going to be looking at the relationships that are established. You're also going to be thinking about the themes that might be there. So we've covered in this, of course, the unique friendship between George and Lenny, and also the idea of dreams and dreaming. The idea of loneliness through George's quote about being the loneliest guys in the world is also referenced. And of course, 1930s America is very, very important to mention in your essays as well. Hope that helps. Let me know if there are any other bits you would like me to go through. But I'm going to Costa Coffee for a coffee and some kind of chocolate treat. Woohoo! Saw my lights. Look at my lights. I feel like one of those little bugs that go towards the lights when I see this. Not really what I was thinking of, but thanks. Ooh, it's lighting everything up. For those of you interested, those are my coats. It looks like I've shaved a bear, a sheep, and some kind of mammoth.
What, move left?
Mm-hmm.